It's a too cold night in a too long winter. Walking through too old snow at the foot of Pikes Peak, you stumble across a path leading to a too often forgotten pub marked Anselm Society Digital Pub at the front. Walking through the entrance, you see tables filled with people talking about faith and art, art's relationship to faith, and faith's relationship to the arts. And a corner table, sitting by a fire, you see two people. This is the cool person's table, obviously. One of them, still with his bushy beard, is one of your co-hosts, Marcus Robinson. And the other one, still with his cool Wesley mustache, is me, Matt Mellema. And this is the Believe to See pub table, part of the Anselm Society Podcast Network. And Marcus, I'm a little hurt.
Why?
Nobody has mentioned my mustache.
Well, you kind of have the beard thing going, man. It's kind of blending.
Well, no. I did it this afternoon, specifically...
Oh, okay. To accent the mustache?
Yeah, because last episode, we talked about how I had my Wesley mustache from The Princess Bride.
Yes, it's coming back to me now.
So I shaved it down so you could see this. I walked downstairs. My wife doesn't mention it at all.
I think that's strategic, Matt.
What do you mean?
I mean, she knows, just not... this has got to be your decision. Make the right one, Matt. On your own.
Well,
choose wisely on your own.
Wait, what are you implying?
I'm saying your wife is wise. She's gonna let you figure this out.
Well, at any rate, you still have your beard. I still have my Wesley mustache, and I don't intend to get rid of the mustache.
I wore a cardigan sweater just for you today.
Oh, that is good.
Yeah, no tie-dye hoodie. And I'd class it up a bit.
And I wore a sweater, too, instead of my suit and tie, where we're sort of meeting each other in the middle.
It is, man.
Oh, that's beautiful.
It's honoring.
But anyway, so this is the Believe to See podcast.
Plus, it is, as you said, too cold today.
Yes.
Yeah, it's too cold.
Friggin' Puxatawny Phil. It's still winter.
Well,
but we are a part of the Anselm Society Digital Podcast Network, which has all sorts of... that's what I'm calling it now. Which has all sorts of podcasts.
CNN.
That's right.
Yeah.
If you want to learn more about the Anselm Society, we are a network of churches from across the Front Range. We're dedicated to a renaissance of the Christian imagination. And Marcus, I have been thinking a little bit about safety.
Safety. It's important to think about.
First of all, I want to be safe by making a confession from last week.
Okay.
I was re-listening to our episode.
This is a safe space.
Thank you.
There's only however many hundreds of listeners, going to thousands, but they're safe people. Go ahead, Matt.
I do feel safe. I made an error at the end of last episode. We were giving our recommendations for ancient literature. I meant to say the Iliad, but I said the Aeneid twice.
That's a different thing.
And in case there's anyone on there just thinking, oh, that stupid idiot, how could he not catch it? I caught it, so there, and now we can move on.
Good, I feel better.
I'm one of those people who I always need to fix things, even if there's no point in fixing it, it'll just make it worse.
Yeah.
So that's what we did just there.
It's good. Somebody is also feeling like, thank you. They're relieved. Safety, man. I bought this new kitchen knife, and I put it in my drawer with the knives, and I'm so used to dull knives that I threw my hand in there and sliced my finger the other day. Not safe. I had to change my whole knife arrangement there.
Now, someone who also knows something about safety is our guest today.
Yes.
Our guest is Amy Lee, who is a writer with the Anselm Society Arts Guild, blogger extraordinaire. Like, she's actually a good blogger.
Oh.
And she had an idea recently that I thought would be great to get on the podcast. So first of all, Amy, welcome back.
Hello, thank you.
You may recognize her. She was on previously. I dragged her along to be the one to talk all things C.S. Lewis. You were the C.S. Lewis episode, so no pressure.
Yeah,
but now we have a different one that is a subject that I think we have all thought about at one point or thinking a lot about now. So Amy, why don't you sit down at the pub table and give us what has been on your mind about safety, the arts, and Christianity.
Oh, wow.
Life, the universe, and everything.
Including kitchen knives.
Yes.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I think the thing that came to mind that I brought up with you, Matt, was a song that I had listened to in college that was by Nicole Nordman. that was called Legacy. And it's a beautiful song. It's about how, well, I guess the speaker in the song is wondering what kind of legacy she's going to leave and whether or not it will communicate the love of Jesus. And this is in no way the fault of Nicole Nordman, but the takeaway that I had was quite lasting. There was a bridge in the song that said, not well traveled, not well read, not well to do or well bred. Just want to hear instead, well done, good and faithful one. And it's a beautifully lyrical bridge. Unfortunately, I think the way that it kind of rooted in my brain was, if these are not desirable things compared to Jesus, then why would you pursue them at all? Maybe I don't want to be well-traveled and I don't want to be well-read. I want to actively try not to do these things in order to pursue Christ. And I think over the past decade or two, I've been kind of realizing that I've missed out on a lot because of that kind of dichotomy.
Because of Nicole Nordman.
Right. That's where I'm trying not to go into another dichotomy, into another binary. But
those songwriters, they're just going for a rhyme.
Right. Yeah. You got to be careful what you listen to. No, it's a lovely song. But that kind of brought up the subject of the way that we think, the way that we can classify things, especially maybe from the background that I was coming from, which is quite mixed. But in trying to have a single-minded, wholehearted pursuit of God, it doesn't do to throw everything out with the bathwater.
So is that even... So a single-minded, wholehearted pursuit of God, how long can we maintain that even?
I think that's a noble pursuit, right? Like if you're going your life long, it depends on what you mean by being single-minded and wholehearted.
For sure.
Yeah.
Well, that is something that I also spent a lot of time thinking about. But first, I'd like to get a couple things out of the way. Did you know Nicole Nordman went to my high school?
No, I didn't.
Wow.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, her picture is on the hallway, and I used to walk past it every day during my most awkward years. That has nothing to do with anything.
She's a bit older.
Yes. Okay. Thank you, Marcus.
Yeah, just pointing it out.
You didn't have to say that, but I'm glad you noticed. So also, I will say it's something because, I went to a Christian school. And so Christian schools, they always have like the chapel speakers who are like the youth pastors who are always very cool and starting to get all the kids like riled up to go do something, awesome and extreme for God. They always paint this picture about someone with single-minded passion and devotion to God. And the way it always came up, like, it usually seemed to express itself in like moving to like malaria-ridden Africa and becoming a missionary or something like that, or like this very stereotypical view of like the global South country during the worst possible thing that could be going on.
Suffer.
Exactly. So the more hardcore place you went, that was what it meant to be fully devoted to God. And to the extent that you didn't do that, well,
you sent.
Or you're not quite as sold out. You're not quite as close to God. So that's what
you're not
I was.
Quite as single-minded or wholehearted.
Yes, exactly. So that was what I was going through. But Amy, how did you conceive of this? And is there something that high school me and all the youth pastors had missed?
Conceive of?
I guess 2 parts. One, what the Nicole Nordman / youth pastor single-minded devotion is, as you used to understand it. And 2, what maybe a more healthy conception would look like.
I see. Well, again, I don't want to cast this on Nicole Nordman or your youth pastors
and
or anybody else that might have come along
who's ever lived.
Although I think there is a truth to the culture that I think probably you and I have more in common.
No, I have it in common too. It's just I was the youth pastor.
Oh.
So I have a lot of guilt around these things.
How many kids did you send off to like military coups in the middle of
I used to have a lot of internal guilt around this whole thing. And I'm like, I wish I had taught differently at the time.
Yeah.
So
no, I see the merit to giving kids the stories of martyrs. I mean, I had these volumes. I think they were called Jesus Freaks. The volume.
Yeah, the DC Talk version.
Right,
yes,
exactly.
I love those.
And I had a lot of biographies of missionaries who had gone into really difficult fields. And that really did seem to be the objective. Like, that's what you were supposed to go for as a responsible Christian. Either you went in that manner or you sent, because they I guess I'm saying they in terms of pastors, but the impression that I got was if not everybody can go, but if you can't, you can be the driving force behind and the support behind the people who are going. And I'm not saying that that's a bad thing at all.
Right.
If you're asking how I conceived of whether or not this was the right way to look at the world in these black and white terms, I think I ran into a wall at some point because I realized that I was missing a huge part of my picture of God, of what he was like. And my world had gradually become a system of negations. Mm-hmm. So if you were going to speak to people about Jesus and you were going to communicate the gospel to them, it was so that they wouldn't go to hell. It wasn't because you had something better to show them. You may not have even had a good picture of what it is that redemption was pointing to, or the new earth or the new creation or anything like that. It was to avoid hell. And so kind of taking that out to other places too, everything that, we ended up, if you had any financial assets, those were supposed to go directly towards the mission field or towards charities. And that is, and I've written a little bit about this, but
By the way, Sun Steep Days, it's a really great blog.
Sorry. I'm stumbling over my words here because I'm trying not to repeat things I've said before. But I think I just basically realized that I was missing out on a huge portion of my understanding of what God is, who he is, because I was trying to view the world in terms of safe and not safe and acceptable and not acceptable, and whether that was sacrificial enough or this wasn't. So, yeah.
I think that's going to lead us to a lot of very worthwhile topics that I think really come very closely alongside like the faith and art that a lot of us wrestle with at Ansel. But before we do that, I do want to make a few things clear. First, hashtag not all youth pastors. I have a lot of very good youth pastors.
Thank you.
Growing up, the youth pastor at my church was absolutely wonderful. I am still really good, have a good relationship with him. And I think a lot of this is perhaps young me and perhaps young Amy maybe misinterpreted what like the Nicole Normans people were saying. But also, I think it's worth mentioning, I have never been a youth pastor, but I am sure that it's really, really hard. So, Marcus, as someone who was a youth pastor, what do you do in this situation? Because you want, part of being a teenager is having passion and getting super into something. So using that sort of language flows when you're communicating to teenagers. But how do you do that in a way that doesn't like make people think they need to go to deepest, darkest Mongolia or else God won't love them as much?
Well, I think it becomes this thing where, I guess for me, I went right into youth ministry I was in Bible school. So I had my first youth pastor job. I was as old as the kids in my youth group. I was 18. This is a bad idea. It just is, because I'm wrestling with all these things and I'm a little bit too earnest. I'm a little too overzealous. And I'm still working out these things based on my church culture. Mm-hmm. And it was very either or, black and white. I remember a song from that era, a Christian song was black and white in a gray world. That's where we got to be as Christians. But I think what happens is in life experience, you do need people to kind of, zeal is good, but you have to put that knowledge in there. Mm-hmm. And knowledge, it was always suspect a little bit in my church growing up, because you don't want to overthink it. You want to be led by the Spirit. You want to, do these things. Mm-hmm. And I think there was just not a wisdom. There wasn't a putting all the pieces together that came, through. I think this is what art does. I think this is what being well-read and well-traveled, those things, when you start to do that, it changes your frame. It changes the way that you deal with that. You suddenly start to go, my little idea of what safe is and what the camp is that we all need to be in, there's going to be a really small heaven. And that's really problematic.
Yeah.
And plus it's heaven really, I don't want to be with these people forever. I hope there's some other faces. So anyway, it is really hard. And I think youth pastors, you're getting your affirmation through, this is a challenge in ministry, I think, especially for young ministers. You're getting that affirmation from something that's in the moment, versus if you have a seasoned minister who's saying, hey, you don't have to get it all in this Sunday. It doesn't all have to happen right now. This is a journey, and we are trying to equip people for that long obedience in the same direction.
Yes.
That really changes everything. Because then things that happen in people's lives, like a dark night of the soul, or a crisis of faith, or, they have some kind of failing in their life, those don't become the end. And those were the places that I think that's where redemption comes in. That's where the grace and mercy of Christ floods in and helps. But it's hard to have that as a young person.
Yeah. One of the things that I appreciate from that chapter of my life is when I think about Jesus rebuking one of the churches in Revelation for losing the ardor of their first love. I feel like the ardor was there. The zeal was there.
Yeah.
And I look back on that and think that I could have more of that in my life right now. But I agree with what you said about wisdom. I love what you said about the wisdom and finding out where everything fits. Because if I go back and I listen to those lyrics now, what I'm hearing is not that being well-traveled or being well-read are bad things, but that you just wouldn't want them to become the focus of what it is that you're trying to achieve, obviously. Yeah. And that's probably what she meant as she was writing it. You don't want to do those things for the sake of doing those things. But if you use them as someone who is free to take part in that kind of activity as a Christian, then they become assets if you keep them in the proper order. If you're single-minded and wholehearted in that Christ is your first love, then everything that follows after it, the truth, the beauty, the goodness, they don't supersede him, but they become ways to point to him, and for you to be able to point others to him through art or through discussion and reason and imagination and all of that. Yeah.
Well, and I think that it's also coming back to that single-minded and wholehearted. I don't know why it triggers me. So
the emphasis was
I mean, the emphasis is really good, but I think the struggle is to say that has to look the same for all of us, because we're pretty good at being judgy and saying, oh, well, you might be getting off over here, when actually those are the things. I mean, as a musician, growing up, it was like only listen to Christian music and trying to convince myself that this music was really good. And it wasn't. It wasn't good. It's just, there was some that was great, but there was things that was just, we were trying to adjust our palate to something that just wasn't good music. And so I wish somebody could have said, please don't burn your records. Don't throw them in the trash and break them.
Did you?
Oh, over and over again. Are you kidding me? Yeah. Oh, the crisis. So, but I wish somebody could have just said, just hold on to them and put them in the right place. And some of that probably shouldn't listen to.
Right. Yeah.
And you need to learn discernment.
Yeah, and that leads me to, I feel like we have done a good job sort of building all the foundation from sort of our general life experience to now. We're going to build the bridge across to have the application here to art. And I'm going to stop using the building a bridge analogy now. But one thing I do think is worthwhile is looking at this tendency for all of us. Like I just showed my tendency to do this. It's like all youth pastors are blah, 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 blah. It's very easy to talk in binaries where this is good, this is bad, black and white. Bad people do this, good people do this. This thing is what bad people do. This thing is what good people do. And one of the ways this comes across the most frequently is when we're looking at consumption of art. So, like you said, Marcus, certain music was bad, certain other music was good, and there's no real in-between there. And that is something that I think gets passed down, especially in the evangelical zone, but it's kind of hard to break. Is that your experience too, Amy?
Yes, especially for people, I feel, who view discernment as how close can you get to something without being burned? Well, it's not art, viewing art, participating in it, or receiving it isn't, the discernment has less to do with how close can you get before you fall into sin. Rather than that, I think art in its best capacity should be something that helps us to return to faith with renewed vision and gives us a way of seeing things that we weren't able to see before. Not, of course, that it supersedes Scripture or the authority of God. And I feel like those caveats always have to be put in place for people who are on their guard against certain things. But, you know, you take Lewis's portrayal of heaven, of the Shadowlands of Aslan's country at the end of the last battle. I keep returning to that scene sometimes because I feel like for me and for many other people, that was the first time we were ever given a picture of what heaven could be like outside of harps and robes and other not quite accurate pictures that we picked up through church over the years. But we were given this image of heaven as a place where creation was restored and what it could look like if it was restored, that you could run without running out of breath, that you could have things that you had learned to love on earth but you saw in their perfected form. If art is like that, if it fills out our perceptions of God and it helps us to understand things that we weren't previously able to see in our different walks of faith, then discernment doesn't become just, you know, how do we walk in a gray world? How do we tell black and white apart in a gray world? It becomes, how do I find the things that are going to enrich my experience as a believer? I don't know. What do you think?
No, I think that's a good way to put it. I like how you started with the intention, because what you said made me think of all of those, you know, like dating and romance classes I had to sit through back in the day, where there's always that sort of jock in the back. So basically, the question is, how much can I make out with my girlfriend before it's a sin?
Right. Yeah.
And I do think it's easy to have that attitude where it's like, okay, there's all this worldly stuff, you know, all this awesome violence and sex and stuff, and how much can I get before
awesome sex and violence?
How much can I get before it crosses the line into sin? Let's go right up to the line. And if that is your motivation for doing it, then you've probably stumbled right from the get-go.
Or you can go the other way and you can start saying, well, what do I need to stay away from? And then there's no end to the things that you need to stay away from. But the irony is the person who is saying, how close can I get? And the person who is saying, how many things do I need to stay away from, are still viewing the world and art in the same way. They're just taking a different reaction to it. And I think what we want to say is it's that way that they're looking at art and the way that they're walking, you know, trying to toe the line or trying to be as far away from it as possible.
Yeah.
That's the obstacle.
Yeah, I mean, you know, Scripture says, you know, to the pure, all things are pure, right? But then Paul says, and I think this is kind of the idea that we struggle with. He says, whatever's true, whatever's honorable, whatever is just, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is commendable, if there is any excellent, if there is anything worthy of praise, think about these things. So that's where we're supposed to turn our minds. But that is, how do you always look at, you're going to see shadow in these things. You're going to see the reality of broken people and stories. And I think that's what art does, is that it keeps it from being, these things can become this abstract kind of whitewashed clouds and robes piece, versus the idea of something that is really lively and something that is very fleshy. You know, I mean, that was certainly an idea, you know, for the writers of Scripture, is like, stop being so spiritual. Like, you know, that was Gnosticism. This isn't something that's up here. You need to be able to live this with your whole life. And so Paul had been the Pharisee, right? And that's where that adding the negatives, that's where it leads, is all of a sudden you just have endless rules. And yeah, it's exhausting. And it breeds, I think, a lot of bitterness, especially in our children.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, a couple pieces there. First off, maybe it's just indicative to me or like the culture we're in, but when you start reading that passage and you're like, whatever is true, whatever is noble, I automatically think like, okay, so read the Bible and maybe sermons and Christian music. None of the good stuff. None of the good stuff.
None of the good stuff.
And I think
too
it's
much.
I think it says more about me than the passage. So that's where my mind went automatically.
Well, I don't know. There's three of us sitting here that have wrestled with the same thing. I think maybe that's how it's been used on us.
No, that's absolutely a good point there. And just coming back to that, because I feel like there's sort of this subgenre of, sort of Christian, quote unquote criticism out there that will basically go through works of art, so movies, music, and count all the swear words, count all the sexual situations. Then there's an evaluation like, yeah, you should never see this. It's basically a binary. And I know I had this quite a bit in high school. It's like this movie's like, yes, I want to see this. Then the review comes out on the Christian website, and I was like, yeah, no, sorry. They say the F word twice, so we're out. Mom, I love you. You never said that. I was embellishing. I'm sorry. But that, I think, can lead us to some very difficult binaries where instead of wrestling like, oh, what does it mean to be an example of what is true, what is pure, what is lovely, it's okay, so that means Bible reading and none of the bad stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So, Amy, while we're talking about these sort of reviews of like Christian reviews of like movies and stuff, have you experienced those in your life? And what do you think they are like? Is there value in them, or do you think it just leads to all these binaries? What do you think?
As a child or as a parent?
Both.
I didn't grow up in a Christian household.
Mm-hmm.
My Christian background came from my Christian education in a Christian school and the culture that came with it. So I guess that was kind of an interesting background because I think kids are good at picking up on what's approved of and what's not approved of, but they'll do that even if the explanation for it isn't given. So you kind of grow up with a sense that this is bad and this is good. I couldn't really tell you why, but we're not supposed to watch that kind of stuff. Mm-hmm. We're not supposed to read things with passages in it like that. And so when it comes down to the binaries in art, well, as a parent, there are obviously things that I don't want my kids to watch yet. And there are also gratuitous things that I will probably never want them to watch. But I think one of the valuable things about art is that it can show you in a different way how to reconcile the reality of a broken world with the hope and the promise of the coming one, if that makes sense. And so this is in discussion with, I guess, my exposure through the Anselm Society and the Rabbit Room, but watching people kind of express their appreciation for ghost stories and horror films. Like, you still couldn't get me to really read a bunch of ghost stories or watch a bunch of horror films, but I've begun to see kind of the merit of having them there in the realm of art. Just like we have writers in the Anselm Guild whose, I guess, aspiration is to remind people that there are supernatural things. And by supernatural, I don't necessarily mean, all the things that we celebrate or see marketed on Halloween, but the fact that there are things beyond the physical. And for some people, ghost stories ghost stories or Flannery O'Connor tales would be a good way to break into that materialistic view of the world. Same thing for horror films. Again, I don't think you could get me to watch one, but I appreciate it when people are saying if it's not gratuitous violence, that a really good horror film can tell you the brokenness of a world in a way that you wouldn't be able to get in the black and white of, say, a sermon text. Yeah. So those are the things that I think I do want my kids to encounter as they're growing up.
Well, it's a great, the idea of, so as a parent, you want your kids to be safe.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
And it's impossible.
Yeah.
Your kids are not going to be safe. Your kids are, it's like we're raising kids in the middle of, like we're in a war zone. And so there is going to be, they are going to find their own way. They are going to cross the boundaries. That's part of what growing up is. And it freaks us out. It's the scariest thing.
Yeah, I know. It's because it was very easy for me as like, a college student or whatever to look back on the things I wasn't allowed to watch and be like, why was that? Tyranny, all this stuff. But now, like my oldest is 3, so I'm not quite at the stage yet. But I see where my parents were coming from, right?
Yeah.
There's so much stuff out there. A lot of it is coming from a view that I don't want my kids to have. And it's hard to sort of be the gatekeeper for all of it. So
right. And if you're going to be, I think it's really important that you know what it is that you're
mm-hmm.
trying to keep in and out of the gates.
Mm-hmm.
Like if you have a family that's saying, we're not going to read this certain series of children's literature because it has sorcery in it, then why? Can you talk about that with your kids? Can you talk about what it is that the Lord directs us to stay away from? Can you talk about what are the redeeming qualities that could be found in that literature? There are friends that I really respect who have chosen not to read things that would, I guess, for lack of a better term, trigger them, because they know their own weaknesses. They know what will help them and what will be, oh, this is a trigger word for me, but edifying to them or not. And I think that's a wise decision. That's the kind of thing you want to be able to teach your children, though. Not just we stay away from this because it has X number of words in it, curse words in it, or it has these elements in it. What I want to be able to have with my children is that kind of discussion where they are able to order and find the discernment that we were talking about earlier.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, that's the idea, is to teach them how to think and discern for themselves. And I think even with our best efforts at that, there is still going to be the place where they don't get it because they're kids. And they're going to have their own experience.
Right.
And so I think this is the place where, as parents, a lot of times we go, just here's the rule. And that's what they hear, and that's what they get.
And you do need that when they're tiny.
You totally need that when they're tiny. Yeah, because they're going to be like, I don't care about why.
Right. Yeah.
But yeah, I know as my kids have gotten older, that's sometimes they didn't connect the dots, and I'm like, but we tried so hard to connect those dots for you.
Yeah.
And yeah, I think it's not a safe world.
No.
So we want safety, but we don't live in safety.
Right. And the best way to, and you don't also want them to grow up thinking that safety should be the paramount thing in their lives as believers. That's not going to be the point. Like you were saying, if we're living in a war zone, what you would want your children to know best is how to fight, you know, and how to make use of their lives instead of having a minefield of superstitions that they have to avoid.
And to choose the right side.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep, lots of good issues, and I would love to talk about it more. But first, our fearless leader, Brian Brown, has tapped me on the shoulder in the digital pub and handed me something that he thinks would be of interest to you. So, Marcus and Amy, I don't know if you are aware of this, but our world has been disenchanted. I assume you know this.
Yeah.
So Christians belong to a decisively established kingdom, but our daily lives bear the brunt of ugliness, pressure, and banality. Forces great and small that divorce the wonders of God from our sight. Worn and disillusioned, we sometimes wish the unseen realities were as evident as a physical realm beyond the back of a wardrobe. But here's the thing, they can be. And if you're interested by this teaser, then first of all, it did its job. And second of all, you should look into coming to the Imagination Redeemed Conference 2019. This is our third year of doing it, so it brings in artists, church leaders, speakers from all across the country. I've been at the past two. They have both been fantastic. You two have both been at the past two as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, so this year's is happening Friday and Saturday, April 26th through 27th, and it's going to be at the Pinery on the Hill overlooking downtown Colorado Springs. For those of you not aware of Colorado Springs, I live in the area outside of the Pinery on the Hill. We're sort of the peasants, and the Pinery are our feudal lords. They're looking down on us. Really beautiful location. And the major speakers include Hans Boersma, author of Heavenly Participation, The Weaving of a Sacramental Tapestry, and a lot of themes on the reintegration of arts in the church. So if you are interested, act quickly because the tickets are going really fast. And we have sold out the first two pretty easily, and we're going to do the same thing this year. So get on that. And now I'm setting the paper down and getting back to the subject here, because I think we're hitting on some very, very tricky topics. And I think one of the trickiest aspects here is something that my dad used to call Christian political correctness. So for this, I want to tell a brief story. So when I was in high school and, I think middle school, that's when the Harry Potter books were coming out. And my parents, because they can't be expected to read everything, they didn't know a whole lot about the Harry Potter books. But word on the street was that Harry Potter books taught witchcraft and everything. Harry summons a demon called the Patronus, I heard one author say. So my mom was kind of hesitant because, this was in the air. But my dad was like, okay, this is silly. This is Christian political correctness. I think this is going to be fun. So he started, getting involved in Harry Potter when I was in high school. I started reading them in college. I felt guilty, not because I was specifically forbidden, but because I knew that the Christian thing was probably to not read these. But I got it. We all seemed to get over it. And my dad is now very proud to say that he was on the right side of history. And my mom is now maybe the biggest Harry Potter nut of us all.
Oh, my goodness.
So, I think what she would say, and I think this happens a lot, it's like, you don't know everything that's out there, so you need to sort of base it on what other people are saying. But it's very easy for that just to be, peer pressure or, like what my dad calls it, Christian PC. So how do we identify this, and how do we stop more Harry Potters from springing up that we freak out about for no reason?
I think we have to lose the safety, like that, making that the end all be all. Like we need to. I think a beautiful book for this is My Name is Asher Lev.
Oh yeah.
And just how this kid is so gifted as a painter. He sees the world, and he's a prodigy. And it's such a great story of how even though that's not permitted in his faith culture as an Orthodox Jewish, this where he's growing up, but his rabbi recognizes this kid has got to be trained. And so he, through the course of the story, he ends up giving him permission to go and to study. And it is a great book about this tension we're talking about, and how he is wrestling deeply. It's his own journey with his faith and with his family, with his culture, and with the world, his gifts. I mean, that is what it is to grow up. The goal is not, if you're going to raise somebody to be an adult, it's not so that they can wear a crash helmet every day, unless that is needed. But it is like, you need to have your head up. You need to think. You need to experience life. You need to be able to say, I'm sorry. You need to be able to say, I like this and I don't like that, and here's why. And that's no good for me, and this is good for me, and this is why. I think it's a totally different frame. Safety, we want that. And we're responsible for little children, right? To keep them safe. But as they grow, that becomes less and less our responsibility. And that's hard to let go of.
Right.
Yeah.
Safety is useful because
Sure.
if you have black and white rules in place, then you can have search engines that filter out certain things and then tell you what's acceptable to watch. There's a book that's maybe suitable for younger readers called Benjamin West and His Cat Grimalkin, which is about a little, he was actually real, a boy growing up, a Quaker boy growing up, obviously in a religious sect where images weren't approved of, but he had such talent for painting and for seeing things and for identifying their colors and wanting to see it, sketched out and painted out. And my daughter and I really enjoyed the story because you can see the parents going through this crisis of like, my son is obviously good at this, but this is something that we don't approve of. We don't approve of graven images. We don't need these images because we have images at our hearts. And it's a really good, we just really enjoyed the story because of how they choose to grapple with that. How can this be a glorifying to God thing? How is this a gift from God? How do you treat it as a gift from God in a culture where really people don't have that as an accepted medium of worship?
Yeah. Well, and that's a fascinating thing because, Quakers and there are different, Orthodox sects that have those stricter rules, and there's a reason why they landed on that.
Yes, that is so true,
and
too.
to just say, oh, that's silliness, that doesn't serve either. There should be this tension, I think, in it. There's something probably to learn there.
Right.
So one of the things I'm thinking is I'm trying to figure out...
And then The Princess Bride, look what it's done for you.
What?
It wasn't good, Matt.
What do you mean? This was a great influence. But one of the things
Whatever is pure and good. And
I believe that Wesley's mustache qualifies under that.
I'm just telling you.
Whatever is lovely, I believe it's qualifies. But One of the things that I keep coming back to as we're talking about this, and again, I'm still a few years away from this, but I'm getting close, is as a lawyer, I like rules. And I can see myself having like set rules for like, okay, boys, you're allowed to watch PG-13 movies, but only if it doesn't have this and this and this, or that sort of thing. But it sounds like what we're saying here is it's very easy for that to be sort of a substitute for what we're really trying to get after, which is trying to have kids who are discerning for what they look at and can do this sort of thing on themselves. And I will admit, I struggle with this myself, you know? When I'm trying to evaluate like a new TV show or a movie, I still will like type in the show like Parents Guide, so like the little IMDb thing shows all the naughty parts. And if it has too much naughty stuff, I'm like, well, not going to do it. Maybe some of that is worthwhile and like it wasn't there for any sort of indulgent or inappropriate reason. I don't have enough time to do it, so if it has this and this and this, I'm out. So, do you think there's any place for rules in that situation, or how do we function with such a hard goal in mind, or what do you think, Amy?
I think rules can be good. I don't think you want them to be the primary focus of your parenting or of teaching your kids to look at the world, right? So one of the things that the words that get circulated through Anselm every now and then, I think is something that Joy Clarkson said. You want to lead by delight, not by, I guess, shaming people into telling them what they should be doing. All right, this was in the context of literature. But I think it's the same thing with kids. This is obviously going to be an inadequate analogy, but if you're trying to teach your child to eat healthy, the best way for them to get there is not to tell them the list and the slew of groups that they shouldn't be eating from and the brands that they shouldn't be eating.
Here are all these awesome foods that you can't eat.
You want them to be drawn to the things that are wholesome and the things that are colorful and the things that can be cooked in your kitchen or bought fresh at the farmer's market. And I'm kind of drifting off on this analogy now, but I think it's the same thing with their consumption of art. You don't want them to operate by, can I do this? How close can I get? How do I sort out the black and the white and the gray? But you want their appetites to be reformed, if that makes sense. And I think that's kind of what I'm getting at when I'm talking about the order of things. You want them to be so captivated by a full version of the freedom and the character and the person of Christ that everything that follows, what they want to view and the things that they will start seeing, no matter where you put them and no matter what you put in front of them, are the things that echo his plan and his promise and his story.
Yeah. I'm so glad you said that, just about the wildness. I mean, Christ is wild. And to have this idea of, a safe Jesus who is just giving us rules becomes something that is very tepid and not attractive.
Yeah, and I think the danger, actually, of the whole safe, let's all walk safely through the world view is eventually it's not just your world view, but your conception and your understanding of God that's going to whittle down into something as big as your thumbnail. Yeah. And I think that's actually what happened to me, like in being so careful. I mean, I grew up in a conscientious culture as a conscientious child, and I took the rules, and I really, and I still have them, but I'm beginning to see that that's not the point, and that's not the way that I'm best going to honor or get to know God. It's going to be through encountering him and not quite being so afraid of breaking the little laws that, I gain a perception of him as a God who's up there keeping score.
Yeah. No, I think it's really important, and I think that there is this thing where we all grapple with the appropriateness, and it's like the place of when is it good to be ascetic, when is it good to... I think there are times and seasons in our lives matter. There are things, the appropriateness of different things that we realize that's a snare for me right now.
Right.
Whether that's something that is going to tip a person struggling with depression into depression,
right, or
somebody who's struggling with lust into lust, but what is the thing that is, that doesn't mean that we just kind of walk, on eggshells through life. It means we make different choices towards the things that really matter, because those things they can become so loud that they grab all of our attention, and that becomes the focus of what it is to be a Christian and what it is to be human. It's like the person going to AA. the goal of life is not to be sober. It's really good, but the goal of life is, life, and that's a piece of it. And so sober is a means to that end.
Yeah.
I think one of the core takeaways I'm having, and really that's why we're here, is a lot of it comes from being honest with yourself and really evaluating your own motives. Because I think it'd be very easy for a person to take what we have said about, don't get so caught up in like a list of rules. It's all about, bigger spectrum of life and all this stuff, and using that as an excuse to, watch a movie with a bunch of nudity in it because he really likes it, You need to be... you need to be honest about your motivations and honest about your weaknesses. If you're the sort of person who struggles with that, then maybe you shouldn't watch any movies with that in it. Something for me, when I watch like horror movies that deal a lot with like dark supernatural stuff, it kind of gets in my head, and I don't think it brings me to healthy places. So I don't watch those. That doesn't mean they're wrong for everybody. It's just I know enough about myself to know that it's not a good thing to do. So now that I've given my own personal lesson, Amy, before we started recording, you found some quotation that I thought really tied things together. So why don't you send us home on a more broad note than what I apply for myself?
Yes, and just to second that, the point of this podcast is not to break the binaries in every way possible. It really started with, I think, my own reflection that I was coming from a place where, in order not to fall into any possible pitfall, stay away from it altogether, and that in itself is not very healthy either. So this quote is from Philip Yancey's introduction to G.K. Chesterton's Orthodoxy, at least the edition that I have, which I found expressed my background pretty well, and I appreciated. So it goes like this. The churches I had attended had stressed the dangers of pleasure so loudly that I had missed any positive message. Guided by Chesterton, I came to see sex, money, power, and sensory pleasures as God's gifts, which, in a fallen world, must be handled with care. We have lost the untainted innocence of Eden, and now every good thing represents risk as well, holding within it the potential for abuse. Eating becomes gluttony, love becomes lust, and along the way we lose sight of the one who gave us pleasure. The ancients turned good things into idols. We moderns call them addictions. In either case, what ceases to be a servant becomes a tyrant. And then he says this. Every Sunday I can turn on the radio or television and hear preachers decry the drugs, sexual looseness, greed, and crime that are running rampant in the streets of America. Rather than merely wag our fingers at such obvious abuses of God's good gifts, perhaps we should demonstrate to the world where good gifts actually come from and why they are good. Evil's greatest triumph may be its success in portraying religion as an enemy of pleasure when, in fact, all the things we enjoy are the inventions of a creator who lavished them on the world.
All right. So, in closing, for all of the youth pastors or parents of teenagers who think I've been insulting them mercilessly.
And all those kids who are in my youth group, I'm sorry.
All those kids
have a talk.
Who are currently in a third world prison because Marcus had sent them to deepest, darkest regions of the world. He's really sorry. We know you don't get podcasts there because they don't allow them in your prison, but
if you get
he's
out,
sorry.
Look me up.
Yeah. So Marcus, with that said, why don't you take us home with the St. Anselm quotation?
This one, I think we've probably done it recently, but it just fits so well. So, St. Anselm said, remove grace, and you have nothing whereby to be saved. Remove free will, and you have nothing that could be saved. Until next time.